You can make a difference. You can give hope to a child. You can change a life. And that is no small change.
To become more comfortable with each other. Well, they get better or worse, but they don't stay the same.
Oh, they don't stay there?
Welcome to another episode of One on One. My name is David Staal.
And I'm Chris Reinsma, and we're here again, and I've got good news this week, Dave.
What's the good news?
The good news is that we got another mug. Okay, so we started out with South Dakota. We went a week without one, and then some of the nice folks in Colorado went ahead and mailed us a mug. And you know, there's some interesting information about Colorado.
Such as?
There are 38 programs in Colorado, so it's a state that's growing fast, and we're super excited about what's happening in Colorado. So thanks, Colorado, and we look forward to a new mug the next time we get together.
That's amazing. But you know, Chris, I have this Starbucks mug here from the very first Starbucks store in Seattle, Washington, and I think they have approximately 38 Starbucks there in Seattle.
At least.
So let's probably move on.
Okay, let's move on. Today, Dave, we're going to talk about how relationships change, and do they change over time? So why don't you start us off? Do relationships change over time?
Of course they do, and obviously we're talking about mentor and child relationships, and they do change over time. Sometimes it's week by week, sometimes you'll see change month by month, semester by semester, definitely year by year. And there's this thing called relationship momentum. The longer you're with somebody, the more momentum, the more change your relationship will have. So Chris, sometimes it starts off really slow, but relationship momentum will kick in.
Definitely. And are you seeing that in your own relationship? I mean, are things different for you than they were the first week you were together with your mentee?
Yeah, absolutely. When we got together, and I think if you saw the first episode of One on One, I talked about how he wanted to go to recess, wasn't necessarily thrilled to meet with me. Well, right before Thanksgiving, then, when I told him that we weren't going to meet during Thanksgiving week because they had off of school, he was really disappointed. He said, "Oh, I'd really like to meet." So I kind of feel like I beat out Thanksgiving.
Right, which is great, great.
Which is a great step forward. But then, Chris, after Thanksgiving, we went 2 weeks without seeing each other. After Thanksgiving, we kind of started back a little further towards I don't want to miss recess. So there was this momentum build, and then we had a little setback, but now we're building momentum again.
Good. Yeah, it's kind of back and forth.
Yeah, and you know, Chris, that's sort of my perception and perspective of relationships changing. What does some research tell us about how relationships change and maybe the stages of those relationship changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot out there in the field, mentoring field, about relationships and how they work in mentoring. And really, mentoring relationships pretty much go through 4 stages. The first stage is just that initial get-to-know-you phase, kind of that initial connection, building the relationship, learning about each other. And one of the things that happens, I think, early on is the mentor is wondering, and the mentee is wondering, you know, is this person, can I trust them, and do they like me? Those are some questions that are rattling in their heads. But that first stage you go through leads to the second stage, which is this challenge and testing that often happens in mentoring relationships. And a lot of the reason that goes on is because these students that we're mentoring, they've been hurt by adults in the past, and they've really been in some untrustworthy relationships. So they're really kind of testing and probing to see, are you going to stick around? Do you really care about me? And are you going to be there for me? So that's that second stage. The third stage is what they'd call real mentoring, okay, where some of those transforming kind of things begin to really happen, and you start to see change, and the relationship kind of gets back on track. It sort of gets off that testing, challenging phase, and it gets to a point where you're both feeling good about the relationship, and you start to see some of those things of change in the child. And then the final stage is this transition. And the transition really is about the ending of the relationship. And though we hope these relationships in Kids Hope USA last a long time and maybe multiple years, there is going to come a day where those relationships are going to end. And that's the transition stage where you're bringing closure to the relationship.
All right. Well, I hear about stage 1, 2, 3, eventually stage 4 and all that. But how can I, as a mentor, notice the change that's going on in my relationship with a young student I mentor?
Part of it, Dave, is just about tracking and figuring out, recording some information somewhere that's going to tell you how the relationship is now, and then have some comparative value. And we want your relationship to be great, and we want you to track it in a great way. So here's what GREAT stands for. We want you to look at the greeting that you and your mentee experience. We want you to look at the relationship. Are you having fun? Are you sharing together in the relationship? We want you to look at the educational aspect of that hour. How is that working together? Are you guys getting some academic work done or some learning? Is that happening? We want to talk about the authorship in the relationship. Who's deciding what gets done during the hour? And is there some of that shared collaborative piece in the relationship? And then how are you transitioning at the end of every hour? A good kind of closure to the hour. Are you looking back on what you guys have done and maybe even anticipating what's going to happen next week? And so if you're able to use those 5 things, the GREAT, we'd like you to rank them or think about ranking them on a scale from 1 to 3. So Dave, let's say the first day that you went to mentor your child, 1 being not so good, 2 being about what you expected, and 3 being great. How would you sort of scale that first meeting you had with your mentee?
It would probably have been a 1.
Been a 1, okay. So it wasn't really,
No.
great. There wasn't a warmness there. But you know what? Now, if I were to ask you, when you go back and mentor him, with the G, is it still at a 1 or is it different?
No. Definitely has moved up to a 2, and I think, Chris, it's because of our secret handshake that we do.
Okay.
We see each other.
Okay. so there's difference there, and there's change that you can see in the relationship. And so we'd ask mentors to kind of maybe use something like that, scaling all these things so that they can see change over time in the relationship.
Chris, as you were talking about that, I was thinking too, wow, that might be a great feedback mechanism to give to your prayer partner too. So that as you're evaluating how your relationship is going in all these areas, share some of that information, especially when you see movement in one of those areas, with your prayer partner, so your prayer partner can know what prayers have been answered, and then also if there's one area that's sort of lagging behind, maybe your prayer partner can help you pray by praying in that specific area. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. Dave, 2 other things I thought about was, 1, you could have your child kind of help you speak into sort of grading out how things were. Like, how did we say hello today? Did you have fun today? Those are all questions you could ask your student too, and they could be kind of informing too how they think the relationship is going. So that's one way. The second thing I thought is, as you get to know your child better and better, you might even think about changing that scale from a 1 to 3 to a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, because that's going to pick up on smaller amounts of change in things. Whereas, in the beginning, it's either not so good, okay, or really good. Well, if you have 10 distinctions to go through, well, that gives you a lot more room to really think about how is the relationship really going. So as you move along, you can use the tool that way too.
And I'm going to assume it's okay to be at 1 for a while
Oh,
and not
definitely.
get all the way to a 3 or a 10 or whatever. I'm hoping that that's okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one of the things you could do is you could even total up the GREAT letters and the scaling there, and you can keep track of those and see that, wow, when you start out, maybe you were scoring a total of maybe 9 points out of 15 at the beginning, or maybe even lower, and maybe it stays there for a while, but you're going to eventually hopefully see change in that, and that the scores are going to be moving up over time. Dave, why does this change happen in the relationship? What are some of the reasons that the relationship does change over time?
Well, I think it's simple, Chris. One of the biggest reasons why you should expect change in a relationship is because your child is going to be changing all the time. When you think about it, your child is growing physically, is experiencing life anew all the time, as far as, guess what a second grader experiences in life and a third grader experiences are very different.
Really?
So your child is accumulating new experiences, learning new ways to react to life. So you have to remember your child is growing all the time. To expect that a relationship stands still with a child is just not right because a child is changing. Real recently, one of my son's friends came over to our house, and he's in high school. They're both football players. They're both pretty big guys and all that. He saw me with my Kids Hope USA t-shirt on, and he said, you know what? I was a Kids Hope USA kid. I had
Really?
a mentor when I was
No kidding.
in like second or third grade. He told me about it, and he said that he was getting together with his mentor
No
again for
kidding.
lunch. They hadn't seen each
That's
other
great.
for 5 or 6 years. Now, Jake is about 6'3", probably weighs 270, 280. I said, you know what? You've probably changed quite a bit since the last time you saw her. But you know what? That's just indicative of the fact that kids are changing all the time. That's why the relationship is going to be changed. Plus, as a mentor, you have to realize you're experiencing life in its fullest too, outside of that 1 hour a week. So both of you bring an entire life together for an hour.
Right.
The relationship is going to change because life always changes for people.
Yeah, definitely. So if I hear you right, Dave, you're saying that really a lot of it is based on the development of the child. They're changing socially, emotionally, the way that they
Exactly.
learn, brains are changing, and even you as a mentor are changing too, the experiences that you're bringing to the table. And when both those things come together, obviously we shouldn't expect that relationship to stay the same.
Well, and the come together part is very critical too, Chris, because as you spend time together, you become more familiar with one another. You accumulate more relational history together. And for that reason, you're going to bond easier. You're going to have shared memories. You're going to have all sorts of relational dynamics because you spend time together. So a relationship that's one thing at the beginning of the year, by Thanksgiving is probably a little different. By New Year's will be even more different. And by the end of the year will look dramatically different. I'm just going to pretend here. What would happen if I don't change,
Right.
but my child is changing?
Right.
What happens if it gets lopsided there?
Yeah, you know, that's another great question, and I think we do see that. I was just talking with a mentor the other day who was sort of bemoaning the fact that they felt like their relationship wasn't going well anymore, and they were really disappointed with that. And as I began to talk with them a little bit, they shared with me that the person they were mentoring was a 5th grade boy, and they'd been with him since 1st grade. And I sort of talked with them about what are some of the things that they did in their time together and activities. And as they talked and shared with me, it was apparent pretty quickly that they were doing a lot of the same things they were doing when they were in 1st and 2nd grade. And I think they had a really strong relationship, and the kid really enjoyed the mentor, but their needs were really different developmentally, and the types of conversations that the child wanted to have were really different. And so the mentee began to pull away from the mentor and began to really kind of show some displeasure with that and just not being excited about the relationship. And so I think that if a mentor doesn't change and meet the child where they're at over the course of time, I think they run the risk of harming the relationship and really having the child potentially pull away and the relationship begin to decline. So I think it's important that mentors kind of assess for themselves, where am I with this child and what are their needs, and really trying to meet them where they're at. And again, it goes back to these things like, what are the kinds of conversations that you're having? Because they're different. Maybe they're more about peer groups and things as you're in 4th and 5th grade, and they weren't so much about that in 1st and 2nd grade. So I think mentors need to really, really be aware of that as they continue in these long-term relationships. Well, Dave, you know, we've come to that time in the hour when we're going to look at the contest winner for this week. And
it's going to change their life.
this could be a life-changing experience. So let me move my Colorado and South Dakota mugs.
There you go.
We're going to have to get a bigger table, Dave, if we get all 31 states up here.
Someday we will.
Okay.
And as a reminder, as Chris is helping us select the winner here, if your name, your church is called, then what we'd like you to do is contact us within 24 hours and tell us that you heard your name on the air, and you will win $100 for your program. So make sure that you give us a call. Chris, who is our winner this time?
Our winner this time is number 160,
Okay.
and that is the Southside Church of Christ, and that's Summer Petty who just trained in October. So remember last week we had a pretty new director, and we have another new director again. So Summer Petty from Southside Church of Christ in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Terre Haute, Indiana.
When does she need to call by, Dave?
Within 24 hours. So we're on the air January 11th, so 24 hours later would be by 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and I believe Indiana's on Eastern Time these days. So by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on January 12th, Summer Petty, make sure you give us a call here in the office to claim your prize. If you know Summer and you think that maybe she is not watching this, as hard as that might be to believe, give her a call and say, you have to watch the one-on-one episode because you're the big winner. So anybody from Summer's program can call us. Summer yourself, we'd love to hear from you.
Dave, let's end with some comments from our experts about this idea of change in relationships. And let me start with what Dr. Roger had to say about changing relationships. He said that relationships create opportunities to learn new skills. And so that's how he kind of framed that idea of change, is that things change, and kids and mentors too learn new skills as those changes in the relationship happen. What did Dr. Brad Schwal have to say?
Well, Dr. Brad concentrated on the togetherness of a relationship. And here's what he said. Time spent together leads to familiarity, which leads to comfort, which leads to openness and trust.
That's a nice progression in that.
Yeah, and I think clearly what he's saying here is that over time, a relationship will change, and I believe over time, a life will change. And Chris, we all know that when you change a life,
that's no small change. Dave, there's lots of cool equipment in this room.
yeah, there really is.
It's kind of fun to play with.
Yeah, it is. You know, Chris, I wonder what this plugs into. Can you see where this goes?
I don't know.
Because I need an extension cord from my office, and it's just like this one. So, you think it's all right?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. Oh,
Chris.
Oh, Dave.
Get the light switch, Chris.
Where did Dave? Was there coffee in that cup on the table?
Chris, there was a lot of coffee in that cup on the table.
How many of those balls? Oh no! How many of those little round balls were in that thing? Okay, someone's got to find a light switch here, because
I told you not to play with the electrical cord, Chris.
Oh my goodness!